What is happening? Something is going on. Can you feel the wave?
I was a kid living in Okinawa, and I was about 13, and I remember traveling up to Nago Bay, and I watched a bay full of dolphins and pilot whales get caught by some fishermen, and then they speared them to death. And it made me go numb. I saw this bay full of blood, and it really impacted me in a really deep way. And trying to understand my reaction to that, I studied as many things as I could about dolphins and whales. And of course, in the process of that, I read all of John Lilly's books, and I eventually ended up hooking up with him. Dr. John C. Lilly was a maverick that highly academic focus that had a PhD and an MD. And he was very interested in the way the mind worked and very interested in consciousness. So he's credited with things like the isolation tank, which he built in, I think, as early as 1954. So he was definitely into the frontiers of consciousness in terms of exploring where the mind could go. And what he did was he actually killed 6 dolphins and sampled their brain and basically asked that no more dolphins be killed, that basically these samples were made available for universities for people to study. So most of the stuff you read about dolphin neurophysiology is based on some of that work and some of those decisions, where various other people that looked into the brain of the dolphin studied some of the work that John set aside. He's acknowledged for certain things like electrode implantation techniques into the brain. He did some of that kind of work. And he did a lot of neurophysiological work and study with dolphins and other animals. Most people became aware of his work in terms of either the Virgin Islands Center or through the Communication Research Institute in Miami that was headed up by Dr. Gregory Bateson. So he had alliances with quite a few people that had insights into the dolphins. And I think what Gregory Bateson contributed was the looking at them as a community or a tribal kind of look, because he had the anthropologist perspective. But John was very scientific oriented, but he was also very detached from the dolphins. He wasn't a jump in the water or get friendly with the dolphins kind of guy. Well, first it helps to understand that human brains and our civilization is less than a million years old. And people would probably even give shorter estimates in terms of actual civilization. Dolphins are probably somewhere between 20 and 40 million years old. So their brain has had a long time to evolve. And basically, what's the newer brain, the brain that's on the outside, the cortex, which is called the quiet associational area. In humans, we use it for visual signal processing. So we tend to think of things visually and graphically. We describe things, like I saw this, I can imagine this. It's good to understand that dolphins' vision is just their second sense. Their primary sense is acoustic, it's sound, and they're using that brain, the quiet associational area, the higher order processes, the outer part of the brain, the cortex, they're using that for acoustical signal processing. So basically, they're experts at sound. I'm going to tell it by telling a story about Marine World Africa, USA, and first coming there in 1980 and talking to the trainers, and they were all very straight behavioral psychology-oriented people. They were trained in a short course in rat psychology and basic behavior modification. So they believed that they were controlling the dolphins. They believed in stimulus response, and they believed in reinforcers and those types of things. And it's real interesting to then talk to them a few years later. Within the course of about 4 or 5 years, they were able to acknowledge they were thinking about things, imaging them in their minds, and the dolphins were doing them. So there was a change in consciousness around people that worked with dolphins that I witnessed with trainers that worked day to day with these dolphins, where they started recognizing that there was a communication that was going on that didn't have a lot to do with what was going on either verbally or with the whistles or with feeding the dolphins. But in terms of my own personal experiences, what I found that I liked to do was, even though we were training the dolphins and shaping their behavior and doing things in that traditional way, I found that it was really good to give them their time. So I would sometimes go by the tank and I would just stand up and I would let them shape my behavior. And they learned that they could move me around by pointing their rostrum a certain direction, and I would go that direction. And they had a lot of fun moving me around and stuff. So they can also play that game with us, and they can interact with us in that way, even though we don't verbally have an agreement to do that. Just by attending to them and basically thinking about your intention, there seems to be some kind of communication that's going on. And usually what I would do is I would come up to them and I would think a thought like, gee, I bet you dolphins are experts in hydrodynamics. I mean, if any being knows about movement in water and the physics of that, it's dolphins. And I looked at one of the dolphins I worked with, Joe, and I thought this, and I thought, gee, I wish you could show me what you understand about the physics of water. And he looked me in the eye, and he moved through the water in such a way that the frisbee in the water that was floating stuck to his side. So to me, I found that kind of interactivity going on where I would think something and they would appear to respond with an answer by the action that they were showing me.
After about 25 minutes of swimming with these guys, my legs were getting really tired. And I've got very, very strong legs, but these guys, they're very fast. And in the same split second that I remembered my friend Marilee saying to me, you can communicate with them. In that same moment, I was thinking, I'm going to tell them to slow down. Before I even could kind of get to the next place where I was thinking, should I speak it, through my snorkel? Should I go, please slow down, or should I think it, or whatever? They all of a sudden dropped off to about half the speed that we were going before. I mean, we had been going at this pace for about 25 minutes, and while my thoughts were formulating, all of a sudden it was just like they just slowed down. And it was at that moment that I was, awestruck, because, you hear about it, you kind of know about it, you kind of go, right, but when you actually have an experience where you are just formulating a thought and they get it, it was pretty amazing.
Well, something I grew up with wanting to understand was how the human mind worked. And it just seemed to me, in my experiences of moving around and growing up, and was that I really didn't understand what people wanted. But what I've been learning is that basically we've all been trained to be independent. There's some social or parental or societal conditioning that makes us think that we need to be independent from each other, that we need to be able to stand on our own. The thing that I've learned from the dolphins is that they're very different than that. They engage in behavior that I would call interdependent. So the first time I swam with dolphins, I floated on my back to see what they would do, and they came up to me and they held my head up and they held my shoulders up.
The very end of that swim, after they had come 4 times to us and swam, all of a sudden we'd be swimming and just going and going, and they would reappear and swim all around us and circle around us and jump around us. And the very last time, right before we were heading back in, my shoulder was really hurting. And one swam right up in front of me, and kind of did this kind of thing where he was going like this, with his, which they never do that. They usually swim like this, but he kind of got right in front of me. And right on his shoulder, his left shoulder, which mine was my left shoulder, it was all bunged up. Something had, like torn it up. And it was almost like he was, looking at me going, hey, I got a hurt shoulder too. And I just looked, and I felt like crying, because it was just like one of those moments that, I don't know what they're about. And, and we always kind of put meaning into everything. But I just thought it was so unbelievable, because he just presented himself right in front of me. He stayed like that. And I looked, and his shoulder was all messed up. And I said, oh, wow, you know.
Interdependence may be the key to long-term survival. Dolphins did not live on this planet, did not survive on this planet for up to 40 million years by being independent creatures. They are able to survive this long because they literally support each other as a community, and individuals, I don't know if they have as strong a sense of individuality as we do. It's like, it's the community. It's all about the community and ensuring the survival of that. And then literally, if some dolphin were to get knocked unconscious and sink to the bottom, the other dolphins would literally hold it up on the top, massage its side until it started breathing again, and they would literally hold it until it could survive. That has been the key to them lasting so long. And I think what humans need to discover is how to overcome these boundaries of independence that we've treasured for so long and learn this next stage of interdependence. When we learn to support each other in that same way, I think we'll make really great evolutionary strides.